Reawakening, a new attitude towards life. These are some of the ideas we use to describe the Renaissance. The history of the Renaissance begins in the cities of Italy. But to understand the Renaissance, let's see what a tremendous change it was from the period before it, the period called the Middle Ages. During the Middle Ages, religion was such a powerful force in European life that medieval churches exercised strict control of society. Medieval monasteries were centers of culture and learning, and the members of the religious orders made up most of the educated class. A man of the upper class had only two important careers open to him. He might become a member of one of the religious orders, or he could be a soldier fighting for a feudal lord. All through the Middle Ages, the church and the castle were symbols of the feudal systems that regulated society. But by the 13th century, feudalism slowly began to decline. Among the reasons for this were the many inventions of the Renaissance era. One of these was gunpowder. Castles could not withstand cannon fire. Another invention, the mariner's compass, made it possible for sailors to find their direction on long voyages and so to extend the boundaries of the known world. Commerce increased in the Mediterranean Sea, bringing new wealth to European cities. Center of the growing activity and wealth was Italy, where life had been affected by the Crusades. On these expeditions to and from the Holy Land, many crusaders passed through Italy. During this period of the Crusades, the people of Italy established contact with the Eastern culture of the Holy Land. By 1300, the cities of Italy were among the leading centers on the trade routes of Europe. One of the wealthiest of these cities was Florence. Throughout the Renaissance period, for about 300 years, the city of Florence was noted for daring exploits and for tremendous progress in almost every branch of human endeavor. To live in Florence in the 15th century was to live in the midst of the aggressive spirit of the Renaissance. The achievements of the city were largely made possible by its wealth. The tradesmen of Florence, the sword makers, clock makers, goldsmiths, and other skilled craftsmen made Florentine products that were known throughout Europe. Dressed in their colorful costumes, the citizens of Florence looked much like this during the period called the Renaissance. The commercial rivalry of Italian cities frequently flared up into wars. Fighting was common between rival families in the struggles to seize political power in Italian cities. In the great Renaissance palaces of Florence, we can see some evidence of the wealth and power of the ruling families. This tremendous building was the home of the Medici, one of the most famous families of the Renaissance. The men of the Medici family were typical of the wealthy autocrats who ruled Italian cities. Lorenzo de' Medici, called the Magnificent, was one of the great patrons who encouraged all forms of arts and learning. Renaissance patrons eagerly collected manuscripts of Greek and Roman authors, works that were being rediscovered in the new urge to understand the classics of the ancient world. For centuries before the Renaissance, most of the world's literature had been preserved in monasteries, where medieval monks carefully copied works in manuscript form. Another Renaissance invention changed all this. The invention of printing was a tremendous stimulus to the spread of learning. On the new printing presses, pages of books could be reproduced by the hundreds and thousands. For the first time in history, reading matter was available in quantity. It was possible for even the common man to become acquainted with the new learning. Among the first books to be printed in Italy were the works of Francesco Petrarch. He wrote both in Latin and Italian, the common language that his own people could read. Petrarch has sometimes been called the first modern man, because he helped open the new age of learning. From his native town of L'arezzo, Petrarch travelled widely, investigating and observing the world around him. Investigation and observation were keynotes of Renaissance thinking. In the city of Pisa, this leaning tower was used by Galileo to make scientific experiments. From the top of the tower, Galileo dropped several weights and carefully recorded the speed at which they fell. His scientific approach to the problem resulted in the discovery of the law of falling bodies. In the Cathedral of Pisa, Galileo observed a swinging lamp. Recording his observations, he discovered the principle of the pendulum. Galileo's work helped in developing a type of investigation which we know as the scientific method. Galileo was interested in many subjects. This telescope is one of those he made to study astronomy. The unending search for knowledge was part of the spirit of the Renaissance. From Italy, this thirst for knowledge spread to the rest of Europe. Copernicus, a Polish astronomer, evolved a new theory of the solar system. And Christopher Columbus was one of the many seamen who discovered new lands. Erasmus of Holland improved the methods of scholarship and research. And in England, William Shakespeare summarized the importance of human life and behavior in his plays. In Italy, Leonardo da Vinci, in a time of great individuals, was perhaps the greatest of them all. 500 years ago, he was designing a flying machine. And his idea for a parachute looks practical even today. Leonardo's notebooks are records of things he learned through observation. His thorough knowledge of the human form was applied to his painting. Leonardo's figures have a grace and a naturalness, a typical characteristic of all the great painters and sculptors of the time. Today, in Florence, we can find many examples of this art. On the walls of many churches and other buildings are paintings called frescoes, directly on the fresh plaster of the wall. It was during the Renaissance this technique of fresco painting reached its greatest development. The perfection of oil painting also belongs to the rebirth of art that occurred during the Renaissance. In many oil paintings, such as this one by Titian, Renaissance artists were interested in portraying people. The human form was probably best expressed in Michelangelo's sculpture. Michelangelo's statue of David shows us the beauty of the human form, and it expresses the importance of the individual. Michelangelo's crowning achievement was the designing of St. Peter's Cathedral in Rome. This tremendous building, rivaling the structures of ancient Rome, is one of the great achievements of the Renaissance. St. Peter's is a kind of symbol of that period, a period when great individuals attempted daring exploits and achieved tremendous progress in every branch of human endeavor. Remember the Renaissance as a period of wealth, as a period of exploration and trade. Remember the Renaissance as the rebirth of learning. Remember the Renaissance as the rebirth of science and the development of the scientific method. Remember the Renaissance as the rebirth of art in all its forms. Remember the Renaissance as the period of great individuals, wealthy patrons, thinkers, creators. And, most important of all, remember the Renaissance as the period of real winning, a new attitude towards life that ended the Middle Ages and opened the way to modern times.